Good morning to you, and thank you for listening to 933 KFM, where we give you better information and play you the best music all day, every day. My name is Ben Mwine, and this is VPN, a show where we just get to sit down with people and talk about what's happening in our country and try and dream about what Uganda can be and how to make that happen, not only for us, but for generations to come. On the show today, we count down to the next government, which is the same government, the old government, which is the new government. You know how it is. President Yoweri Museveni being sworn in this coming week for his 6th consecutive term after he was officially announced a winner of the elections earlier this year. More importantly, though, by the time he finishes this next term, he will have been president of Uganda for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. On the show today, we get to ask, what does he need to do to change what we think about what he has done so far? His manifesto and the campaigns that he's been running on over the past few terms, has that been effective? Do we expect anything different this time around? As we look at his manifesto week, what does he need to do for real economic social transformation in the new term? Is he actually able to secure your future? That's the discussion that we're having on the show today. Helping us make sense of this are people who went to school to be able to lend their brains to matters like this because of what they have studied and what they do. Our very good friend ED at SEATINI, the Southern and Eastern Africa Trade Information and Negotiations Institute. It's such a mouthful that we usually just say SEATINI, so it makes it much easier to process. Jen Nalunga, it's always a pleasure being with you.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
It's always a delight. I think I should tell people that beyond the things that happen on air, we usually get to spend time with the panel here before and after the show, and it's some of my highlights. And Jen is one of my absolute favorite people.
Thank you so much, Ben.
To spend time with.
Thank you, Ben.
The other person that is with us is one of those people who you can't help but not only admire, but respect. She commands respect where she goes, not by choice, but just by the nature of who she is. She has represented Uganda at every possible level imaginable, including being a representative for the UN Food and Agriculture Organization in China, in Mongolia, in South Korea. She has also served as a Minister of Agriculture in the Ugandan government at the very beginning, interestingly, of the NRM rule from 1986 to 1995, and is therefore very well placed to give us some insights as to what was happening then. She also happens to be wearing a beautiful and gorgeous pearl necklace, which is, I must confess, a big weakness of mine. I have a thing for pearl necklaces. Dr. Victoria Ssekitoleko. Good morning, and it's always good to see you.
Good morning, Ben. Pleasure to be here.
It's good to see both of you. We should be joined by Ramathan Ggoobi, economist, and I like to say, unfortunately, Man U supporter in a little bit, to help add that economic perspective for our discussion. Right. Let's start with you, Dr. Ssekitoleko. If you don't mind, one of the things that we love on this show is history lessons, because the majority of our listeners, the majority of us, don't read too much, so we usually don't know too much about what's happened. You were there at the beginning of the transition into what was then the NRM government in 1986. Talk us through your journey at that time, getting into the government. What were your driving forces? What were your motivations? What was the excitement? What hopes and dreams did you have for Uganda as a country at that time? If you would just paint a picture of what that looked like, because it lends good perspective to, well, where we are now and hopefully where we need to be going. So what was it like back in 1986 when you were being appointed to be Minister of Agriculture?
Yeah, Ben, those were beautiful times. First of all, at that time, 1986, there was a positive vibe in most parts of Uganda. I
Right.
would say most parts, because the north had started bubbling a little bit, but the vibe was positive. So, being made minister then really meant you are a minister.
Right.
I started off as a deputy minister, which gave me time, 1986 to 88, I was deputy minister. That gave me time and facilities to travel the whole country, to read about what was going on, and know what we in the sector of agriculture were up to. I was deputy minister for agriculture and forestry, so I got to know every district. By then, there were a few districts, less than 80, so I knew every district.
Yeah.
I knew everybody who mattered, who was in charge, and who was likely to make a difference in the agriculture sector. Because one of the 10-point program was an integrated sustainable economy.
Yeah.
And as Minister of Agriculture, I knew that was my job. So in order for us to have the sustainable and of course for everybody to benefit, I knew that it had to be inclusive. So, as I said, 1986 to 88, that is what I was trying to understand. This is what we want. How do we get there? Then 1988, be careful what you pray for. I got what I was praying for. I became full minister. Now, when I became full minister, I looked at the human resources I had, the financial resources I had, and the most important resource, which is the public. Like I said, there was a positive vibe. Oh my!
A wave of optimism.
Exactly. Everybody was positive. And when the minister was coming to visit your district, oh my God, the whole district turned up.
You're like a small goddess, weren't you?
Oh yeah. And especially the Minister of Agriculture.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that was powerful. So I sat down with my ministry, and we wrote, what do we need in order to get to that utopia land? And they told me everything. I went to cabinet, I went to the president, I presented my requirements, I got everything. At that time, in a district, specifically, I remember Iganga and Kasese. I don't know why they keep coming to my mind, but I remember them. Each of them had 7 vehicles. Just one district had 7 vehicles.
Yeah.
Yeah. You are in charge of livestock, you have got your vehicle. You are in charge of agriculture production, you are in charge of extension. 7 vehicles. That is 1. 2. I went to Ministry of Finance physically and told them the 30th of every month, my ministry has got to be paid. I don't care how little, but 30th of every month. In fact, I told them, from now on, I'm going to be paid cash. So the people I work with in the office, including the office messenger, 30th of the month, our cash arrived and everybody got it. I would ask the districts where I was visiting, did your salary come on time? Yes. Then I would go to Ministry of Finance. Thank you for keeping your part of the bargain. I'm doing my part.
Yeah.
Then I told the president that, you see, agriculture is a science. And if you study science 10 years into your life, you have forgotten half of what you learned, and the other half has gone obsolete. So
I'm sorry, Doctor, you need to repeat that because there are statements that are so profound that they need to be said twice.
No, agriculture is a science.
Yeah.
So if you go to school and these professors teach you agriculture, you do this. If you are growing tomatoes, you do it like this. You are doing mangoes. Now, after 10 years, you have forgotten. The mind forgets. Half of it is forgotten. Unfortunately, because science is dynamic, the other half is obsolete. So I told him, these people are now scientists in name. We have to send them back to school. What do you want? I want scholarships. We got so many scholarships that I had to actually go to Ministry of Public Service and ask them to let me take people who are still on probation, so that they start doing their masters, especially the women. Because I said, let us get them before they get married. So every woman who was in the Ministry of Agriculture during my time, you wanted to go back to school, scholarship. Because the deal was, for every scholarship deal, if there are 2 people, one is a woman, the other is a man. If there are 10, 5, until I ran out of women. So those,
wow.
Yeah, and because I was in the ministry for 9 years, those women started coming back. The positive vibe was practically blossoming. You know, everybody was practically running. So one of the first things that indicated that we were blooming is 1989-90. There was so much production that there were just no takers. My president had the problem of going to every international meeting and whining to the other presidents. We have produced so much. Can you buy? And let me share this on air because I have always thought it and I've always felt it and I have never said it out loud. When we started growing all these crops, first of all, the diplomats in Uganda were dead against our program.
Yeah.
This program, all it said is, if you have been growing half an acre of cotton, half an acre of coffee, half an acre, please make it 1 acre, just that, because that is what they could afford. Then they said they didn't have hose. We provided the hose, and the Ugandans went to the field and did it. Now, when the diplomats saw that it was really going to happen, this happened, I'm not exaggerating. They went and started shipping beans, ships full of beans to Tanzania, because Tanzania was going to be our buyer, and all the way to Rwanda and Burundi. So that we Uganda do not sell our beans in the region. This happened. You know, before I became politician, I used to say that when politicians fail, they start blaming this one and the other one. Honestly, that happened.
Yeah.
Anybody who is about my age remembers how much we produced and how we failed to sell. We did not sell because we were disorganized. Because we were disorganized as Uganda. We failed to sell because we were disrupted internationally.
Someone mentioned on the show last week about how you actually had tried to do some barter trade with a couple of the other countries, and that also became a big problem.
Exactly. In fact, some of these ambassadors made it their job to harass us. I remember the president one time had to call a meeting. I remember he flew us to Kasese, brought everybody, and told these ambassadors to leave his ministers alone. They told him to actually fire me. So he said, now that you are telling me to fire the Minister of Agriculture, why don't you give me the full list of those you want to fire so that I fire all of them at once? Then I remember the conclusion of that conversation was, when my ambassadors are in your country, they cannot even talk to a clerk in foreign affairs. So leave my ministers alone. So those times were different from now.
I need to bring in Jen for a moment here, because I know how passionate she is about this particular, because it also, again, lends perspective to the discussion. Yeah. You've spoken really, really passionately in this room about this. For the second week in a row, I'm hearing that little thing there about foreign interference, where you come in, there's a wave of optimism in the country. The Ssekitoleko and the Musevenis have this big dream for Uganda. And a bunch of white men sitting in a room say, no, we can't let this happen. This is not acceptable. And so they've made so much beans and maize, they can't sell it. Give free beans to Zimbabwe, give free beans to Tanzania. At what point do we actually start saying, hey, that's not acceptable, and what do we do about that? Because you seem to hear that quite a bit. As if, even though you're electing a president, he's not really in charge. It feels that way almost.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ben, for inviting me again here. And good morning, our listeners. And I'm also happy to be with Honorable Ssekitoleko. I have liked the history, that optimism, that sense of hope that we can be able to do it. And for me, I think, I don't know what we need to do to have that one back. When you galvanize the entire population, inspire them that things can be done. And and I don't see that in that this transition. It's like, no transition, So maybe those are things which we can discuss and say, how do we make this transition a real transition, bring back that optimism that we are starting.
Even if it's the same government, right?
Even if it's the same government, that we are starting a new journey, that although things haven't been going well, but there is hope. There is hope. I don't say that. I have liked the sharing that history about the production. And I always say it here, that if we are to solve the challenges we are having of economic development, we start from the market, not from production. We work backwards. Let us secure the market first. And markets are negotiated. and you put a, you put a,
You sign.
You sign,
Right.
and you go to a dispute settlement under the World Trade Organization, their dispute settlement mechanism, and I think that's what we need to do. Negotiated markets, signed markets. I shared here the other time I was here that Kenya secured a market of avocados, China, and they sat and they agreed on the tariffs because China puts tariffs on their avocado from all over,
Right.
but they negotiated, and Kenya told them, you know what, we are running a trade deficit with you. You are importing more, exporting more to our country. We need to reduce the trade deficit, or else we can see.
Also,
so they negotiated, and China agreed that you bring so much avocados, bring them frozen.
Right.
So and the specification is clear. Now Kenya is producing avocados, and what they are doing, it isn't that they are having so many. They have plantations big, but even women who have maybe 10 trees, as long as the standard is right. We want this standard, and for me, I think that's where we need to go. In fact, Kenya has also secured a market in France for Murondo.
The one that we buy on at the traffic light.
Yes.
Right.
And they have also negotiated, the numbers. So, for me, I think as we move forward, we need first of all to know what markets. And there's a disconnect also between what Honorable Ssekitoleko was saying, that there was a lot of production. But on the other hand, Ministry of Trade has been negotiating agreements all over markets. We have the EAC market, we have the tripartite COMESA SADC market, now we have the CFTA market, we have EBA, EU, everything but arms, we have AGOA. We are swimming in markets. And I tell people that that's when government negotiates markets, that's market access, not entry. You haven't entered. So we need to look at ways of ensuring that we enter those markets, sustain our presence there, and that will require doing so much more.
On the show today, we're talking about the NRM government, which used to be the NRA government and is now going into a 6th elective term, though by the time the next term ends, they'll be in power for 40 years. And we're talking about what needs to happen for one of, at the time, in 1986, the key tenets of the 10-point program, social and economic transformation. We don't know how much of that has happened. Ram will shed some light on that. We've been getting some insights from Honorable Dr. Victoria Ssekitoleko, who is a woman enthusiast and an agri-business person, and she's earned her chepes for that one. She's also been giving us some great insight on what it was like in 1986, and I want to come back to that in just a moment. We also have Jen Nalunga, who is ED at SEATINI, and was giving us some great insight on how trade things are done. Dr. Ssekitoleko, let me come back to you for a moment, then we'll come to Ram. You said something in the first segment that caught my attention. For you to be able to go to Ministry of Finance and say, my salary is paid in cash, almost unconventional, I would say almost inefficient, actually, because of, well, that's not the way things are done, right? And yet it worked at the time. What was that like? What was the operations like in this cabinet that had just sort of been put together and was trying to get Uganda up and running?
Yeah, first of all, during those days when you had a budget, you stuck to it. You know, when you have a budget, everybody is given a document which indicates total budget is this amount, budget for Ministry of Agriculture is this amount, salaries is this amount. You know how many people you have in your ministry. And during those days, we did not have many banks. But most importantly and honestly, during those days, we did not have many thieves. this money.
I like that. There are many
Many thieves.
Yeah.
Right now we have many thieves.
Because this money, what would happen is finance would put our money on our account. Then our chief accountant, together with the accounting officer and the cashier, would actually go get this money and pay everybody. But of course, that was at headquarters.
Right.
That the districts would have their money sent to them through their banks. But for us at headquarters, was when we came in, the salary was not that high. So I said, since the money is little, let us have it. So that is how it happened. So I did not even have to see the minister about that. When and if you have this job and you want to do it and do it well, you understand how the system works.
Yeah.
So I went to Minister of Finance. They told me this is the officer in charge of agriculture. The whole agriculture budget is under her. I remember she was a lady, and I got to know her. I think she was called Sekandi. I got to know her and all the team which works with her. So we agreed that from now on, you cannot increase my salary, but just make sure it arrives. And every 30th day, without a break, from 1988 to 1995 January, that money was paid. Yeah. I'm told when I left in January, February, things changed. Things changed because the permanent secretary of that day was not used to that type of straight business. Yeah. Then at the same time, we used to have, when you are going to travel, you have your allowances. Like the driver has his allowance. Then there is the fuel. For a reason I will never understand, they used to give that money to the minister. But when you minister, money for the fuel of the minister's car would be given to the minister. But I am a minister. Why would I hold that money?
When you're not the one who drives the car.
So during that time, I changed it. Whoever is responsible holds this money. So this driver would get all this cash for the car. We go, we come back. It is his job to account. The moment I left, they're like, no, that is not how it works. So that this money is too much. How can you call it too much when he's driving a 300 million vehicle and then you cannot give him 3 million?
Yeah.
So that the way it used to work was the system you set up. So the system I had set up, everybody was responsible and everybody held a little bit of the ministry.
How did this work with now the rest of the ministers? Because you'll be privy to what was happening in your ministry, but then you had all these other ministries that somehow seem to be in tandem, with each other. There seemed to be some sort of synergy, both at cabinet level, but also down in terms of how everything was working at the time.
Let me tell you something which happened like 7 years later. So 7 years, I've been in the ministry for 7 years, and one of the highlights of the ministry is agriculture competitions. Now, when we started agriculture competitions, there was not a single coin in the budget for agriculture competitions. But this was a multi-million, by then million, program. I got the money from the donors. From after the donors realized that I'm not going anywhere and that I'm not going to steal a coin, they became so generous with me, you can't believe it. So we started this agriculture competition, whereby first year, which was I think 1990, we sent 200 Ugandans abroad. 16 went to the United States. You go to the United States for 6 weeks, everything paid for, and the moment you land in Washington, you get $6,000. And the Americans tell you, if you want, you can share a room, you can stay in a hostel, you can rent a house, but that money will look after you for so it is $1,000 per week.
Yeah.
Then another team went to Britain, another team went to Denmark, others went to Egypt, Zimbabwe, and so on and so forth. 200 Ugandans went abroad. By that time, 1994, I was sending 500 Ugandans abroad after the agriculture competitions. You win in your category, you're off to the US, everything paid for, UK, Denmark, and all that. Now, two things. First time we organized the competition, when we had no money and I had no idea where the prizes were going to come from. We got such big prizes, I just didn't know what to do with them. Because we got 2 tractors, Massey Ferguson tractors, 75 horsepower, that's huge. So the best farmer got a tractor. Second best got a tractor. Now, in the 5th year of doing that program, the grumbling in cabinet was just unsustainable. So the president called a meeting just to discuss what is happening with agriculture. Yeah. The argument was, why do you give her extra budget after we have agreed? Then I remember Honorable Chionga was the Minister of Finance. The president asked Chionga, when do you give this woman more money? And Chonga said, I don't give her even one more shilling. I don't know how she does it. So I don't want you to think that because the vibe was positive, everything was positive.
Yeah.
We had our ups and downs.
Ram, you listen to Dr. Ssekitoleko talking, and it's interesting, sort of getting a feel of what it was like in 1986, and here we are, 35 years later. The stats, you're the statistician, the stats point upwards. The reality seems to point in the other direction, both in terms of mood, in terms of
Thank you, Ben, and good morning to the seniors in the room, Honorable Ssekitoleko, my good friend Jane, and of course the listeners. I came listening to the program. As we were starting, I was also starting the journey from Nakawa there.
From Bugolobi.
I've been teaching. It was very interesting to listen to Honorable Sekkitoleko's days of the 80s and 90s. You know, I always tell my students, you know, at university I specialize in teaching Ugandan economy, that there were those days we used to call golden days. The first half was in 1960s, when we had just gotten independence, up to around the 66, 67. Then the next round, the second round, was 1986 to early 90s, actually up to the end of the 90s. There were golden days because there was a lot of discipline, fiscal discipline.
She talked about there being no room for supplementary budgets at the time.
Fiscal discipline.
And very few things.
I've read a number. I've read a number of speeches of the president, post-budget speeches. They were very, very precise. In 1992, he told his colleagues at Parliament there that inflation is indiscipline. And from today, there's not going to be inflation because I will not tolerate any more indiscipline. If it need be, all of us, we are going to park our vehicles and walk and deliver services on foot if there is no money for fuel. We was alluding to, of course, the fiscal indiscipline which was beginning to crop in, and it was actually Mutebire, who was a PS then of Ministry of Economic Planning, who wrote a paper, Way Forward 1. That paper is there in the library of Ministry of Finance. And he said, whatever is happening in this country is because these bushmen, they don't understand the difference between fiscal discipline and military discipline. For them, they know military discipline better than fiscal discipline. So we are spending money on things which do not add value to the economy, and those things must stop today. And they stopped, I want to tell you.
For a time.
Yeah, what she's telling you happened. That, you know, people, when they came from the bush, they were carrying money in bags, as she's saying. In sacks, actually. They give you a sack, you put it in the boot of the can, you go.
Wait, hold on, is that still happening? Like, I've seen a few sacks.
Those ones now are stolen sacks. The other ones were official.
Oh, those are official
Official
sacks.
money, you take it to your department and account. Your account. There was unity though in those days. Unity. What she has told you, that the government was speaking in the same language with the population. We were on the same wavelength. Today, I don't need to belabor. Then the service to the nation. The men who came and women from the bush were serving Uganda. Were actually our liberators. Were our heroes. Were our freedom fighters. Now along the way, they started to serve self. Many of them. And I've looked in their faces severally and told them. Just a few days ago, I was in Chankwanzi telling the NRM party that the main impediment now to our transformation, to what you are struggling to do, is one, corruption and impunity. People are stealing with impunity. And the president was the presiding officer.
Of the impunity?
No. He was the presiding officer of the meeting.
Just checking.
You are so, you know,
you have to be clear about these things.
I know. And it is good that you asked.
Yeah,
Somebody would have said that he said the president was the presiding officer of impunity. No, of the meeting.
Okay.
And
thank you for that clarification.
No, thank you for asking the question. And he actually told his team in yellow that the days of corruption are over. We are going to go in our caucus, and if anyone steals money, you go to jail. And the parliament, I want you to help me.
That is effective when?
The challenge is those in parliament also. We need to cross-check. So there is a serious issue now compared to then in terms of the corruption. Then market fundamentalism. You know, when the NRA had just come, and you know the president is historically a Marxist. There's a man who believed in economics of distribution more than this self-serving economics. He presided over that and encouraged it. And I think many of his people were listening then to him.
Yeah.
These days, beginning around the turn of the new millennium, Uganda adopted the free markets, free market economics, actually unfettered market fundamentalism. That here now dog eat dog. If you don't, you know, one time Mutevile told us at Makerere when they were celebrating, I think, 40-something years of Bank of Uganda. He said that for us in Uganda, if you have eyes to see where money is, amass it. And I asked a question, Mr. Governor, what if I don't have the eyes? He said, you die. Nobody owes you a living. And I think that is wrong economics. And that led to what you are seeing today, that there is this huge inequality. When you were in this place where we are, the greater Kampala metropolitan, this Kampala Mukono Wakiso, Mpigi, the urban Mpigi, you may think Uganda has transformed. Because there's a lot of transformation here. You look at the hills of Kampala, all littered with very expensive houses.
And skyscrapers.
With swimming pools and jacuzzis, and people living as if they are in Hollywood.
Yeah.
But a few kilometers outside this place, poverty is stinking. You can see it with your naked eyes. You know this thing they say, stinking poverty. You enter a village and you smell poverty. You get it? We
It's not supposed to be funny, but
now, Honorable Ssekitoleko, however, talked about the emphasis they put on production, and they produced a lot. And she reminded me of the economics I've been preaching lately. You know, agriculture is a cobweb, as the minister knows. When the season is good, farmers go and produce. But now, the problem comes to marketing that produce. Then the prices collapse because everybody has produced and the demand has not changed. Then when the prices collapse, the farmers get discouraged. They don't go, all of them, to grow again the following season. Some will say, I still have maize in my store. Why should I go to the garden?
In the house.
In the house, that's what I mean. Now, they forget that agriculture has a longer gestation period. So the rains come, then they go. Now by the time the others are harvesting, the few who went, the supply is low. And as a result of that, you will find that the prices are going to increase. So that is what has been killing Uganda. And I would want to really encourage and I think Jenny alluded to it. Let us ensure that we do agriculture as a value chain.
Yeah.
When I looked at the data recently,
Yeah.
this budget which we have just spent in 2019-20, 20% of that budget went to research. 23% went to MAIF to do policy, to write plans, and to travel, these travels she has been talking about. 49% went to production. Only 2% was invested in post-harvest management and value addition, and only 6% was invested in marketing. Now, that's where the problem begins. And Jen has told you, in Uganda, even this 6% we are spending it on negotiating market access.
Right.
But there is no market entry.
It's always been obvious that agriculture was the backbone of our economy.
I don't think it's the backbone.
It isn't it?
I don't think.
What is?
And I will tell you why.
You're with Ben Mwine, Jen Nalunga, Honorable Dr. Victoria Ssekitoleko, and Ramathan Ggoobi, as we try and figure out where the next 5 years are going to take Uganda as the new old government gets sworn in. I insist on calling it the new old government because it's a new government and yet it's not quite, is it? Aiming for 40 years, and I think that's the number that's key, because when the next term ends, because now that's been it's being rubber stamped this coming week, it will be 40 years when it wraps up, from 1980. It will be pretty much as old as the average adult in Uganda, the old people. Jen, the person listening to the show right now, like Ram says, the average person listening to the show right now wasn't born when Honorable Ssekitoleko was Minister of Agriculture.
Yeah.
Exactly. They look at life a little bit differently. When you look at what Ram just said about being able to go to Butambala and smell poverty the moment you drive into the village, you were there in 1996.
I was.
We had come from a difficult time, truth be told. I remember lining up in Mbara at the foods and beverages store to pick half a kilo of sugar. You had to line up for about 2.5 hours just to be able to get a half kilo of sugar. Things changed to an extent, right? For the average Ugandan in 2021 versus the average Ugandan in, let's say, late 1986 going into 87. Are you able to make that comparison and say the average Ugandan is now better off than the average Ugandan was at that time? Has there been a remarkable improvement?
Thank you so much, Ben. There has been lots of changes. Those of us who were there in 1986, life wasn't really easy, like you have said. I remember 86, where was I? Was I?
Well, is it easy now?
I'm coming to that, But, it was almost uniform. We all didn't have sugar, It was difficult to say.
Soap.
No soap, no salt.
No milk.
No milk. It was so difficult to say that Ram has, some things there in his house. No, it was almost the same. Today, the problem, things have changed for some people, but are worse for others. When you look at, I want to go back just to look at what we are saying. How do you see whether, things have changed for people? You go to the villages, deep in the villages, even the schools, primary schools, were working. And somebody could go from there. Remember, I have a brother. He studied from my mother's side. And he was able to come to Chisubi. Kasanda Primary School. He came to Chisubi, just filling in. Nothing, and waits for a letter that you have been
You've been
admitted in Chisubi. You know, when you look at the health facilities, superb. I remember my mom was telling me she's still there in Kasanda. She's a midwife. She retired from the civil service, early retirement, joined the Private Midwives Association. But she told me it was really rigorous, even where to take you. You need to show the number of people. They look at it and say, are your services needed there? But there is a hospital, you know, is it needed? Don't go there. Go to another area because they have maybe 2 midwives. You know, that kind of precise planning, you know, that was there. And this is what Honorable Ssekitoleko has also shared, that planning as a team and having a clear direction. You know, in civil society, we have what we call a theory of change. When you are getting a donor, say, oh, so you want to go and intervene and do that. What's your theory of change? That when there is a problem, there is inequality. In fact, like Ram has said, we don't have poverty. We have inequality. Yeah. The rich are there, the poor are there. I was telling my children yesterday that it's almost like it's a tale of 2 cities. You remember that novel? You know, we are 2 countries. Like Ram was saying, those who are like in Hollywood, in Uganda here, and those who are, you know, stinking. In Uganda. In Uganda, you know. So, and the theory of change, and that's why I think we need to agree on and debate, and have a national debate. What's our theory of change? You know, that when this happens, when we produce, when we do this, when government does this, when the private sector does this, then this will happen. We engage on that and we say no. The role of the state should be like this. And Ram has talked about the whole issue of the neoliberal. Is that what we want, the mode of development? Is that the paradigm we want? Because today, it's like I said, dog eats dog. It's a jungle. Whatever could survive for the fittest. And then you find so many models coming up. And we're here discussing the parish model. And I'm saying it won't work. It's ill-conceived and it will not work. Because already the broader context is neoliberalism. And then you insert the parish model. And here we are getting all these, you know, models. That goes. After that, which one else? There are so many. Ntandikwa. What? You know? Everything is coming. But we haven't yet changed the broader context. We haven't yet agreed on a theory of change. And we haven't agreed on that in the next 5 years, what do we want to see? If we are to reduce inequality, what needs to be done? You know, I don't see that. In fact, for me, I even don't see that in the new old government. I don't see any fundamental change. I see it's like we are sliding deeper into the challenges we have been having.
Dr. Ssekitoleko, when you're progressing through life, you usually are able to take stock of where you're coming from and where you are, right?
And where you want to go.
And where you want to go. I'm 42 this year, and I have to keep sitting down and thinking to myself, from the time I became an adult, when I finished university in 2000, what has my path been like? Because now we're at what we call halftime. Ram and I are at halftime, right? You guys are, I think, in the 60th minute in the football games. We're at halftime, and at halftime you have to try and think about, okay, so how did I perform in the first half? What's going to happen going forward? And I'll be brutally honest with you. My assessment hasn't been good for myself. I sat down and I said, my first 40 years on this planet have not been really what they should be, both in terms of what I'm doing for other people, what I'm doing for myself, with myself. And I need to figure out how to be able to improve that going into the second half. So there's a bunch of men who I'm honored to be doing life with. And we've been having these discussions on a regular basis. And in about 3 weeks or so, we've actually planned a retreat to go and somewhere and hide in a bush and look at each other and abuse each other and say, okay, now what's the plan? What do we do going into the next 40 years of our lives, right? And the reason I say this is when you look at yourself as a country, right, you should be able to do that. The NRM government is now pushing on to 40 years. At what point do we see that assessment to say that, look, this is where we started in 1986. This is where we are now. And what they call a real-world assessment, not what Ram made a powerful statement that I'll ask him to expound on a bit. He said that Uganda we're developing a rich country with poor people. Surely there should be someone able to see that trend and say, we need to do something about that, right?
Yeah. Yes, someone should ask, where are the people? That is one. Two, now, speaking as a grandmother who has gone through it all, and at this stage, my biggest worry, which gives me sleepless nights, is the fact that your age mates and those slightly below you have lost hope.
Right.
There is nothing worse in the world than having to deal with somebody who has no hope. If it is a patient, you are going to lose them not because they are very sick, but because they have no hope. But now, here is about 60% of our population has lost hope. Where are we going? That is my worry. So, having said that, I just want to comment a bit on what Jen said about the parish model. The parish model as a model, if you like, if when it goes into the dictionary, it's a good thing.
Right.
But in Uganda, we did not prepare at all for it. Because like I keep telling everybody, I come from 5 districts, because I live in Kampala, but then I farm in Wachiso. I'm married in Butambala. My mother comes from Bujiri. Now, and of course I was born in Jinja. So when I visit these districts, it is intimate. I go into the homes and actually sit down and eat. So I know what I'm talking about. I live there.
Right.
When I go to Bujiri and Namayingo, my grandparents' place, it is sad. The schools are not there. When I go there, I try to talk to the teachers. I remember one time I arrived with a pickup. We had this meeting where we had brought the schools together, but some teachers who come from a distant place had not arrived. So I went with the pickup to pick them up. So when I got there, they were actually waiting for transport. They were about 6. So I spoke to them in Lusoga. They looked at me and laughed. And I said, what? We don't speak that language. And I'm like, what? I thought these days you teach mother tongue. Here we speak Katogo. And I'm like, so are they teaching these children in Katogo? Because those districts, from Busoga all the way to Tororo and all that, we speak all sorts of, but somehow we understand each other. So when the government decided that we teach in mother tongue, it really became Katogo. Now, I have got grandchildren from that Katogo. Then I have got grandchildren from Wachiso. And of course, the fantastic grandchildren in Kampala. When we have Christmas and they meet, they are like, the Hollywood is visiting Uganda. So that, and of course, when the parents of those from Uganda are meeting with the Hollywood people, you really see hopeless people. There's just no hope. When you get a message from my relative from Bujiri, will be asking for Mpayo Mtwalo. You get a text from Kampala, and this young lady is saying, yeah, things went very well. I think we are going to need to mobilize 25 million. They are cousins. But the other one is looking for 10,000 to take the child who got measles, even if he was immunized. Then this one is looking for 25 million because he's investing. It's okay. I'm happy for that. But you
actually, in some cases, they're looking for 25 million to do a birthday shower.
But no, everybody knows I don't contribute to that. I don't contribute to that. So back to the parish model. If you have Wachiso, which has got about 3 million people, and has got a population, and has got a number of parishes, which one parish is more or less the size of a district elsewhere. And then you are going to have 2,000 people in a parish in Kalangala or in Bulambuli, and you give them the 38 million. You come to Nakawa, we are, I think, about 250,000.
Yeah.
And you give us 38 million. I have always asked exactly why can't somebody use the GPIS? Why can't somebody look at the statistic from UBOS so that they know how many people? Because he's talking about developing Uganda, rich Uganda with the poor people. If you are giving 38 million to 250,000 people in Nakawa, really, what do you expect? You give it to maybe a small parish like in Bulambuli, as I have said, that's where my grandmother comes from. They may do something with it. So it is not a bad idea, but one, can we do something that generates some kind of hope? Let us get that vibe, let us be inclusive.
Yeah, for the record, 38 million people by 250,000 people, each person in there would get 152 shillings.
But that money includes the committee meetings.
I'm just saying, even if you just split it between the people in the constituency, it would be 152
you're
shillings.
counting the children.
I've been hearing a lot from the three of you about, where we're coming from. Some of the key things that are standing out is how there was a lot of hope and optimism in 1986 that seems to have waned. How life was tough, but things got better. But now then, life is tough for most people, but there are a few who seem to be in their own world that we don't seem to know about. And I like the analogy you've used of Hollywood versus Uganda. There's some people who are in Hollywood and some people who are in Uganda. Back in 1986, when the Ssekitoleko and the Musevenis and the Mbabasis and the Messages walked into Kampala and took over, they had a very clear plan. You've studied this with a fine-tooth comb. You know it probably by heart. They wanted to bring democracy. Seem to have had a semblance of that, if you want to call it. They wanted to bring security. That we can say they have done. They wanted to consolidate national security and eliminate all forms of sectarianism. I think we can fairly agree that they've completely failed at this. Correct me when I'm wrong, please.
They were doing well until they curve.
Yeah.
Go on.
Defending and consolidating national independence. How are we doing on that? Building an independent, integrated, and self-sustaining national economy. Restoration and improvement of social services and rehabilitation of war-ravaged areas. Number 7, I shouldn't even bother reading because there's almost no point, but since it's there, I'll read it anyway. Elimination of corruption and misuse of power. You can laugh, it's okay on that one. Number 8 was redressing errors that have resulted in the dislocation of sections. This is the Hollywood point, Ram. And I'll read it again. Please listen carefully. This is point number 8 of the 10-point program. Redressing the errors that have resulted in dislocations of sections of the population and improvement of others. Number 9 was cooperation with other African countries in defending human and democratic rights of brothers, basically Pan-Africanism. And number 10 was an economic strategy of a mixed economy. Right. Who wants to go first? Number Jen, let's start with number 8.
Which one?
Number 8 is redressing the errors that have resulted in Hollywood and Uganda.
But you see, all these things are interrelated.
Right.
Yeah, looking at redressing the errors. They are related to elimination of corruption and misuse of power. It's related to building a sustainable, integrated, blah, blah economy which has failed. So if you have failed in building that economy, how do you redress the error when you haven't eliminated corruption? So
Are we being too negative?
no, not really. We are not. And you know, another aspect of the elimination of corruption and misuse of power, I just want to bring out another angle of the misuse of power. I see on the roads, which really annoys me, which alienates me as a Ugandan citizen. You are driving on the road, it might be a small car. Now, every 2 minutes, and somebody is just like your flies, off the road, you go off the road.
The listeners
You know?
are not seeing what you are doing.
Hey, okay, that you like you are.
They basically wave you off the road.
They wave you off the road.
In anger, moreover.
Huh.
They actually, in some cases, they come and bang
And
your
they have
car.
a stick.
Huh.
They come and bang your car.
Huh.
The guy has banged my car with a stick. I don't think I've been that angry in a long time.
You know, you know that misuse. You even don't know who is passing. After 3 minutes, another one comes. For me, that's the optimum of misuse of power, and I feel alienated as a taxpayer. I feel so annoyed, so angry. And that's also corruption. Because that's our money. I look at a car, those people waving you off the road. They are seated about 10 policemen. And I said, that's my money. That's my money.
You're
I'm
paying
the
for that.
taxpayer. I'm paying for that. There are no medicine in hospitals to redress the errors. There are no medicine in hospitals. The schools are run down. But you find somebody has 3 pickups of those people with guns waving you off the road. You know, so when you look at all these things, they are interrelated, and I think we are not in a very good place.
Ram, can you save us? Because the average person would probably suggest that we are being maybe a bit too unfair or critical. Are you able to look at all of those things and say, look, you guys are being too harsh? We've actually made grown in leaps and bounds as a country, as an economy, and you people are just being...
Actually,
You're
the
being harsh.
NRM party themselves have been doing internal assessment and evaluation of what the 10-point program has been in the last 35 years or has delivered. That program was a very good program, but was abandoned along the way. There is a political economy to it. For example, when you look at all these, with the exception of democracy, security, sectarianism, which are squarely on the shoulders of the government doing, some of these aspects like building the self-sustaining economy, it is something which I think NRM abandoned in 1987. Because they came with a model which the IMF and the World Bank were not agreeable.
Yeah.
So they tried to get her fired.
And the World Bank told them this will not work. And if you want our money, you must do the following. First, liberalize the economy. Privatize everything that government is owning.
Sell everything.
Yes.
Deregulate.
Deregulate. Make sure that you leave banks to behave the way they want. Let them set the interest rates. Let forex bureaus set their own things. Let even people decide whether they need environment or not. Remove all your regulations.
Right.
Then reduce government. Cut government by half. And so many other things. Now, when we adopted the Washington Consensus, officially it was 1990, but we had started in 87. That's when the Economic Recovery Program was launched. And we stopped doing what the NRM, NRA had planned to do.
The vision.
Because they were broke and they needed the World Bank money. and IMF policies.
And we know that beggars really
Not choosers.
Have no choice. I remember one time, actually, there's a video which is circulating recently when the president and Keith Muhakanizi and Mutebire and Mayanja Nkanji, when he was Minister of Finance, when they were in Washington, in the corridors of a building, and they went to meet these IMF gurus, the leaders of the Bretton Woods, and they were like, even the body language, you could see who the boss was. And they were telling them, we hear, Your Excellency, that you don't want to implement our policies. Then we shall, and you see the president was still having a lot of confidence, was telling them what he wanted vis-a-vis what they were doing.
Yeah.
But they won the war, and as they said, the rest is history. Now, when you fail, like Jenny say, when you fail on the side of economics, politics cannot work. That's why in economics, they teach us to always mind about what we call a political economy.
Right.
Everything we do is politics and economics together.
How you balance.
Because a poor society cannot have good democracy. Poor voters don't vote objectively.
They don't vote.
Someone
with
will
their
come
stomach.
with half a kilogram of sugar and they will change their mind.
Yeah.
Someone will just print a beautiful picture and they say, this one is better than the other picture. I'm voting this one. So we don't have a society where people can serve interests. People are voting, what have you given me? However much you may go to speak the correct policy, if you don't bring music and buy some sodas, people will not vote for you, especially in bigger Uganda. Here in Kampala, if you don't abuse Museveni, people will not vote you. The more you abuse him,
The
more you are making the people happy because they're angry with what they are. The other one I told you, the economy is not working for them. So, to me, I think this 10-point program, they were largely dependent on the economic transformation.
Right.
Uganda has been growing without transformation. You can have growth, which is jobless, which is full of inequality, growth which is presided over by foreigners. Because when you look at
environment,
which sounds about right when you consider where we are. This whole notion of the 10-point program and the idealistic attitude that you guys had when you took over power, it became apparent almost immediately that it was going to be a challenge. And you mentioned on this show today how you had people trying to get you fired because you were trying to do something that was going to take your country to the next level. Isn't it fair to say that you can understand why President Museveni then realizes, my vision is never going to work. Let me just fall in with what needs to happen and forget about everything else? Because obviously, I don't see a scenario where he manages to pull these things off without having the support of these people that you're talking about. Can you paint a scenario where that would have been possible?
When we came in with the 10-point program, I remember there was a point on education.
Right.
That is one. Two, there was that point of everybody not, point number 8, not alienating anybody. Those did not need a lot of money. The schools were already there. And then this alienation is something you continuously do, you just don't do it. But let me say this first. As we talk now, 1 of every 20 Ugandan who is under 20 years has never enrolled in school. That is 1 out of every 20. Count 20 children? Never, not even P1. Currently, since like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when let's say 900,000 children enroll in P1, only 50% average make it to P7.
Right.
But that is if you add my Fatasi Kwachiso Kampala. When and if you look at rural, look at Asnamaing and whatever, in some districts it's 97% school dropout. They don't make it to P7. So they end up not speaking a language we speak. When you talk about democracy, we are talking about voting. They have no idea what you are talking about. So the rest, for as long as people don't understand what you are about, you tell them we have got COVID. That is a disease from Kampala. They honestly don't know what you are talking about. So if the success of this program hinges on these poor people, illiterate people who don't, the other day I was in whenever I'm a radio person because I grew up during those days of radio, and I always switch on from Kampala. The moment you reach somewhere in Mavira, they say, oh, Mavira radio tekola. Then you get to around Njeru, and the station you are listening to disappears. Then you pick up some radio station.
Pick up the ones in Jinja.
Then as you continue driving, if you are going to Soroti, the radios are speaking a language you don't understand.
Yeah.
That is Uganda. How do you expect those people who do not even speak a language, which you cannot have? I normally listen to these economists speaking. They don't have words to explain to us in Rusoga or Uganda what they are talking about. Then they end up saying that we did not do what was expected of us. How? So, for as long as, how did we lose it? The easiest way to lose this was when the president insisted that we want to do UPE, Universal Primary Education. And we had agreed in cabinet that there should be 4 children for everybody. Then out of the blue, he goes and agrees to some pressure and says, oh, bring all of them. So there was no plan, nothing.
But that's my point, Doctor. Did he at any point have a choice? Was there any scenario where he can say, no, I'm not going to do what you're saying?
I was there and he had a choice. I'll give you a specific example. This thing in Tandikwa,
right,
and NADS, they wanted to bring them when the IMF and World Bank tried to bring them when I was minister. I looked at this thing and I just couldn't see how it would work in Uganda. Even during that time when we were doing privatization, I kept saying, don't privatize poverty. When you said you leave these people, let them go to cooperatives, we had killed the cooperatives. So they had nowhere to go. So at that time we argued. I remember let Mayanja Nkanji, the Wapakabulo, and in fact it is those who are to be fired. Wapakabulo, Chigozi, Mayanja Nkanji and I were supposed to be fired because we were disagreeing with them. And the president said no. And we won. That is how we ended up producing so much that everybody had something to eat, even if we couldn't sell. At least we had the dignity, the human dignity of, let's say, Semaka, the head of the family, saying I can feed my family.
Yeah, but if you look at how it worked out, Jen, ultimately, NADS did happen and Tandikwa did happen. You seem to be very convinced that there was an option where President Museveni refuses to succumb to external influence. Ram and I don't see that.
You see, for me, I think we give too much credit to external influence, to IMF World Bank. I know they pushed on to our countries the structural adjustment programs, privatize, liberalize, do all that.
Deregulate.
Deregulate and all that. But you see, Uganda, when you look at the way we do our policies, it's like it's a pendulum. They told us do the structure adjustment. We went the entire way. The entire. Look at Kenya. Kenya still has its KCB and it's operating here. They still have their produce marketing boards. They are still operating. For me, I think we need to negotiate with IMF World Bank because it's a bank. That money is not free. It isn't. And you can be able to say, I will do this, I won't be able to do that. And today, we stand a very big chance because COVID happened. COVID, in a way, is good for us.
Today.
It's a bit good for us because there is a rethink. There is a rethink in policies, in economic policies. And most of these people, remember those Chicago schools and those Friedman, they are the people today who are saying, by the way, I think this thing didn't work. And we have a chance to be able to put right some of these policies.
Absolutely.
And again, when we look at day to day, when we are putting policies in place, for example, the taxes, the tax review, we can be able to balance, because tax is about redistribution. Tax Ben put in the social services for the Namayingo people to be able to get an education. We are not doing that. That is anti-IMF. Look at our budget. You put so many trillion in security. We are not at war. And the biggest insecurity are from those young boys who are not working. You know, that's a threat. You see a boy, the muscles,
Yeah.
and he's there seated loitering, goes there, comes back, goes there,
And it sees your car tires.
You know, so we need to rethink, and that is an external influence. So we have room for maneuver. We can be able to negotiate, and I think, you know, was it Truman, President Truman, who said the buck stops here in the White House.
Right.
The buck stops with the president. And he has choices. And he can be able to make right choices if he wants for the people of Uganda.
Please advise Jen that her utopian thinking is...
It isn't utopian.
It's not utopian. She's actually saying what many Ugandans believe should be done.
But
Me too.
But the challenge is this.
But
the challenge with the politics and what we often want to do is that politics tend to address real issues on the ground, and analysis is quite different from the politics. President Museveni and NRA picked guns and went to the bush in 81 to shoot themselves into power. And once you get power, you must
keep
hold
it
and keep it jealously.
At all costs.
Jealously. That's why Jane and I are not politicians. Or if we were politicians, we would be very poor politicians. Politicians are people who look at things differently. In everything that you tell a politician, he will ask, am I going to be able to maintain my power if he has the power?
What is in it for
If
me?
he doesn't have the power, will I be able to win over people and they support me to get the power? So President Museveni came with your view of things. He was actually more Marxist than anyone who has ever thought. I've read his books. Himself has written about it in the Sowing the Mustard Seed and so on. And you know, many people have spoken about him because he has been a very instrumental figure in our politique and so on. The turning point, I've told you, was 1987. Why? Because in the first year of President Museveni, there was a lot of difficulty, economic difficulty.
Yeah, sure.
People were really badly off. You know what happened? Inflation increased to 358% in December 1986. The inflation of Uganda was 358%.
yeah.
The entire market didn't have an essential good.
Yeah.
The few goods which government used to buy, they asked us to go to sub-county headquarters and line up
Yeah.
to
No
access
fuel.
them at a lower price.
For context, Ram, that would be equivalent of a kilo of sugar now going for about 13,000 shillings. So if inflation rises that high,
Absolutely.
it would be like now paying about 15k for a liter of petrol.
It literally means that every single year you're going to pay almost twofold the price you are paying.
Threefold.
And,
yeah.
and it is quite tough.
Yeah.
So, Museveni called a meeting at Entebbe at the beginning of 87, and he asked one question: why is the economy so bad, and yet we have liberated most parts of the country and people have gone back to the gardens and so on? the meeting were looking at him. And you know, those days he was a semi-god, very powerful, both
But
militarily,
you
politically,
Yeah.
but also intellectually.
Yeah.
Now, there was then a younger man called Emmanuel Musime Mutebile, working in finance, who put up his hand and said, the problem is you, Your Excellency. And said, oh, and in the entire room, apparently, and I've read these in books and also corroborated with people who were there.
For the record, I was not there because by then I was deputy minister.
Ah, so you were not sitting in cabinet. Right.
So, and he said, so the problem, how? He said, because you have controlled everything. Remove price controls, liberalize the economy. Stop this thing of, he had closed the economy on international trade. He said, we shall only allow some butter, but we can't open to sell nothing, and we are just buying. And he was making a lot of sense if you are using common sense. But Mutebile told him that's not economics. Open. And he said, so you are saying if we removed the price controls and did all those things, you are saying the economy will grow and we shall have goods in the markets and the prices are going to reduce. And Mutebile said, absolutely. He said, okay, from today, no more controls. And you, younger man, I've appointed you the permanent secretary of that ministry. Go and implement those ideas you are talking. That's how Mutebile got himself a job from that meeting. And as they said, the rest is history. From that time, Yoweri Museveni lost the control he had over his economic ideas, ideology.
Right.
And he handed it over to the Mutebiles who were good students,
Scholars
of Britain World.
of our friends.
And as they
London School of Economics.
Yeah.
and you know, Jane was saying, just in a minute, before you go to your break, that she's worried that the parish model, much as it is a good idea, will not be implemented because we are still in neoliberalism, and the two can't work, together. I disagree. Uganda is actually on a move away from neoliberalism. There is clear policy reversal now. The government is so committed to industrial policy. That's why you have seen now a lot of things which were not thought of in the past are happening.
We've had
UDC is back.
We've had this stuff.
First, listen briefly. UDC is back, and it is investing. Government is now doing business once again. Number two, you are seeing central planning again. That's why NPA is now the one which determines who is getting which money.
I want you to hold that thought, Ram,
and the role of the state is back.
I actually want to ask about that. So here's the thing. Obviously, you're reaching a point of divergence with with Jen and Dr. Ssekitoleko.
Nothing has changed.
Here's the thing. Maybe Rami is able to educate us a little bit, because I do know for a fact that he was part of the team that was advising the party as they were trying to draft their manifesto. What is it that he put in there that he thinks is going to be different, and why does Jen and Dr. Ssekitoleko disagree about it, being implemented? As we wrap up the show, of course, we usually like to, look forward and see. Right, we've talked about the history, we've talked about the problems that there have been. We need to talk about what then happens. Where do we go? You are part of the team that has been advising and putting the manifesto together. If you can complete your thought process so that then Dr. Ssekitoleko and Jen can wrap up by shooting holes into it.
I'll be precise. Actually, the manifesto which was done is the one that clarified that for Uganda to implement now things at a level where people are benefiting of Uganda, we need to adopt a parish model, a parish development model.
It's fine.
What is parish model?
Why has it taken 35 years?
No, listen.
Sorry, I'm just
I wasn't there. I don't know the 35 years. Myself, I'm about 40.
Right.
So I'm just I don't know what happened.
Right.
But the point is, now we are here. Right. We need Uganda to move forward. I'm one person who wants to look at where I'm going more.
Forget the past, the Bible says.
Absolutely. Now, there has been this thing, my good friend Ben, a talk in Uganda that we are good at writing policies and plans, but poor at implementing them.
Which is true, right?
No, it's not true. And I'm not just giving an opinion. We did a research 2 years ago in 2019, and this research was from paper to practice. Implementation of industrialization agenda in Uganda. We went and talked to who is who in this country, from the president up to the local government people down, on why are we not implementing. We did stakeholder analysis, and we found that the problem with Uganda, first and foremost, the policies themselves and the plans are not well prepared. They are not good plans.
Right.
And because of that, therefore, this tendency of saying we have good plans but we are bad at implementing, you know, a plan is as good as its implementation. If you don't implement, then it's not a good plan, not a good policy. And most of them were not well prepared. Now, it's the same problem which is now facing this parish model. The parish model idea has been on being floated, but it hasn't been well prepared.
See?
That one is a fact. But it is one way of reaching. You know, this government is so much at the center here. People in Kampala planning for the people of Uganda, whom they don't know even where they are. You are in a room like here, where I am in a you call it SC.
Yeah.
And I'm planning for someone in Butambala in Chitago.